Question is, how did we get there? Too many of us actually live in denial. And so we talk about capitalism. We talk about how we're the richest country in the world and how we have all of this money. It was built on the backs of slaves and also cotton. That's right, slaves and cotton. Free labor and cotton actually drove it. By the Civil War, the U.S. supplied 77% of Great Britain's cotton, 90% of France's cotton, 77% of Russia's cotton. How do you think we actually became rich? How do you think we paid for the Industrial Revolution? It's because of cotton. It was because of free labor. There's a new book out called The Empire of Cotton. Sven Beckett is the author of the book. He joins us right now. It is called Empire of Cotton, A Global History. Sven, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Ronan. Great to be with you.
It's a fascinating book because too many people, they walk around and they say, well, you know, that stuff was so long ago. It has no impact, no bearing today. You argue in this book very simply that without cotton, without that free slavery, you do not have America as a dominant nation economically, and it doesn't drive the world economy.
Right. I think Empire of Cotton even argues, perhaps more significantly, that the shape of the global capitalist economy as it emerged in the past 200 years really, first and foremost, needs to be understood from the history of the central commodity, and that was cotton. So cotton didn't just matter to the economy of the United States, but it centrally mattered to the economy of Europe, and it was at the very origins of the world-altering industrial revolution that created the world in which we all live in today. And the peculiar thing about cotton is, as you just mentioned, that it does not grow on the continent of Europe. It had to come from elsewhere. And it came principally in the late 18th and then throughout the 19th century. It came from the United States. And in the United States, it was principally grown by enslaved workers. Indeed, in 1830, approximately 1 million Americans, nearly all of them enslaved, grew the cotton that fed the Industrial Revolution in England, in France, in Germany, and of course also in New England. So this story of enslaved workers growing cotton is absolutely essential to understanding the history of capitalism in the long term.
Sven, in fact, Gerald Horne, in his book, The Counter-Revolution of 1776, Slave Resistance and the Origins of the United States of America, he argued that the 13 colonies were afraid the British were going to abolish slavery. If they had abolished slavery, then that would have ended the economic engine of this new, fresh nation. He said, so as a result, that played a role in why they fought the American Revolution. And so the North benefited in America from slave in the South, because that's where the merchants, the insurance companies, and the banks were. They financed the ships, they financed the slaves, and so it's all tied to slavery and free labor.
No. So slavery is really absolutely essential to that story. So the cotton grown in the United States mattered greatly to the global economy. But then the growing of cotton and the export of cotton was absolutely central to the U.S. economy in its first 60 or 70 years after independence. And it was so much important to the American economy that approximately 50% of all exports of the United States consisted of cotton. Then the cotton in the United States, it becomes also the first manufacturing industry in New England. And as you just mentioned, it is not just a story about the slave plantations of the American South and the planters in the American South profiting from the institution of slavery, but it's very much also the merchants and bankers of New York City, of Boston, of Providence, who are very much involved in that slave economy. What they basically do is they connect the slave economy of the American South to the booming industrial economy of Europe and New England. So
what you're saying is, Sven, without slavery, without the cotton, then you don't have the economic resources to finance building, finance construction, finance other industries.
Right. I mean, I think the history of the American economy is obviously not just about cotton and not just about slavery, but at the particular point in time, in the first half of the 19th century, it is absolutely at the core of the American economy.
It's the foundation. It's the base.
Yeah, and then weirdly enough, we have often told our stories about the economic ascendancy of the United States as a story of yeoman farmers in the New England countryside and of industrious artisans in seaboard cities. But what we have often ignored is the not just the contribution, but the absolute centrality of the slave economy of the American South to the national economy, and then in turn also to the global economy. And it is in a way a kind of weird thing that we have convinced ourselves of a story of capitalism that whitewashes that story and that eliminates the history of slavery out of the history of capitalism. And Empire of Cotton, in a way, tries to bring that story back into the history of capitalism and into the history of the United States. Of course, we don't know if the national economy could have emerged in other ways as well without the institution of slavery. We will never know if there might have possibly be another history of slavery. But what we do know is that the actual history of slavery, of the American economy as it unfolded, and of the global economy as it unfolded, rested significantly on the institution of slave labor in the American South.
Joy?
Well, hi, this is Joy at Jefferson Nurian. Thank you very much for your book. It is immense and wonderful reading. Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the things I am most struck about, here in the United States, we think everything begins with us. And what I love most about this story is that this was a rolling history of 500 years. And what I would like you to address just a moment about how it is very important that you cannot tell the story of this commodity without telling the history of about an entire other continent, other cultures, other people, and how even in the United States we turned it into slave labor, that in the late 1800s this became wage labor in England.
Right. I mean, it is very much a global history that, as you mentioned, I don't think you can even begin to understand the history, let's say, of slavery in the United States without embedding it into this larger global history. So, for example, the idea of creating cotton textiles originated approximately 5,000 years ago in India, and it migrates from South Asia to the continent of Europe. The expansion of industrialization, of course, takes place first on the continent of Europe. The demand for raw cotton comes from the continent of Europe. The labor comes from the continent of Africa. The production of raw cotton for global markets migrates from the Ottoman Empire, where it first originates, what is today Turkey, then into the Caribbean, where it for the first time was attached to the institution of slavery. Then by the 1780s to the country of Brazil, and only in the 1790s to the United States. And in some ways, the slave rebellion on Saint-Domingue in what is now Haiti was quite crucial because Haiti, Saint-Domingue was the world's most important cotton growing island in the early 1790s. And when slaves engaged in a revolution in Saint-Domingue, the supplies for European industry fell rapidly. And it was at that point that the United States became crucial to the global economy. But then, as you mentioned, it is also the connection between the expansion of slavery and free labor, because in industry, in manufacturing, of course, free labor takes precedent, becomes dominant.
Right.
And in some ways they expand simultaneously, and they enable each other's expansion.
Folks, the book is called Empire of Cotton, A Global History by Sven Beckert. Sven, it is a phenomenal book. We certainly appreciate you joining us, and just wish we had more time. But again, just a phenomenal book. We thank you very much.